Hello. I'm saying hello to everybody viewing on the Buddhist channel. I'm Vimala Bhikkhuni, and I'm from the U.S., from the Midwest, and I live outside of Chicago, about an hour in the far suburbs north of Chicago. So I'm a Midwesterner for the last 30 years. And I'm with Blue Lotus Buddhist Temple, which is in Woodstock, Illinois. And I live just a very short distance from the temple. Because I'm the only nun at Blue Lotus, I live on my own. And the temple is where I've been for 13 years. So what I wanted to talk to you tonight is about something that's been of great interest to me, and living in the pandemic, well, the last year, moving into the second year, living in the pandemic, which also dovetailed in America with our presidential election. So it's been, this last year we've had a lot of conflict and a lot of polarization in the country, and that's been a big concern to me. So that's what I'd like to talk to you a bit about tonight. So before I begin, I'd like to begin by opening our discussion. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. So I'd like to start by telling you a little bit about my own interest in the subject I'm going to talk about. I found that even working with Buddhist groups in the last year, maybe even before that it started, there's so much polarization between people over the president, and as we got closer to the elections, then also about the opposing candidates, and that it seemed like the gulf only got wider and wider, and it became more and more difficult to have any kind of discussion unless it was just with someone with the same viewpoint. And it made it very difficult for people in families where some people had one opinion and some another, and people were actually having periods where they couldn't talk to members of their own family. And a lot of people in discussions, and a lot of this was during a time since we've all been on Zoom, a lot of the discussions would often, even when we would try to keep politics out of the discussion, it would seep in. There were all kinds of ways it was seeping in. The frustration was so great with people. And every Buddhist group wasn't necessarily all of the same political viewpoint. So there would be problems in different groups where there would be people who would decide they would have to stay away from certain discussion groups or certain groups of people because they thought the conversation would become too political and would be upsetting for them. So we then began talking quite a bit in a few of the groups I'm in about how can we communicate with people with very different ideas, and even in a time when politically the gulf between us was even greater. And then I was thinking about this topic, about how, because it was hard for me to talk to people who I knew were of a really different spiritual group than me being Buddhist. And I would not want to get into political discussions with them, but it seemed to come up a lot. And it was difficult knowing how to deal with that in a way of being able to listen to someone's viewpoints and maybe sharing in differences. It seemed like it often became much more, it was much more difficult. And I noticed that friends I have on Facebook, where we might even share the same political views, I saw how often the comments they made and the statements they made about politics on their Facebook pages was very aggressive and very negative and very, often very crude. And I'd find that I'd need to kind of let them rest for 30 days without responding to anything, because I thought that their positions weren't helping the conversation. They were really kind of shocking to me. So I was recently going through some papers that I'd had from before the pandemic began, and I found a beautiful program from an interfaith Thanksgiving service. The Blue Lotus Temple is part of an interfaith group in Woodstock that covers Northern Illinois, and it's called Faith Bridge. And I've been on that board, and now I'm involved in helping with projects they do, but I'm not on the board these days. But every year at Thanksgiving, which is an American holiday that everyone participates in, but it's not a religious holiday. Thanksgiving just honors the first Thanksgiving, you know, the story that we learned as children, but we now know is much different from the story we learned in elementary school. But we still have all different religions have a connection, because Thanksgiving is an American holiday, and we tend to celebrate it now more as just a day for families and friends to get together and have a very traditional meal, or just to be with friends. There's no gift giving. It's just a day of being together and celebrating what makes us more alike than different. And the Faith Bridge group, because it is made up of so many different religions, this particular group especially, well, the Thanksgiving event is a big, one of our favorite programs to do. And we often use a lot of music and poetry, and we can work with all of the different religious groups in our community, and music and poetry and writing seems to be a really good way to celebrate all the diversity. So I was looking at the program from November of 2018, and that's one that I had worked with. And so when I found that program and realized it has the beautiful wording in it that just perfectly fit with my topic tonight, it was exactly what I had been thinking about. So this is a reading that we did, and it's called Living Wisely According to Our Traditions. And what this was the church we were in was divided in two sides with an aisle down the center. And we kept the seating that way because it worked with our group. But there was a leader, and then each side of the building, each side of the groups, and the groups were smaller than 50 people each. So there were two groups, and one would do one reading, and the other side of the room would do the other reading. And it went back and forth. And I want to read this for you, because I think it just says beautifully What it does is talks about what really is important in our religious traditions and what is really necessary for a religion to be, or a spiritual path to be a good path, to be a path we could look at seriously if we were looking for a religion or a spiritual path to be on. And the first part of this is taken from Karen Armstrong, and you may be familiar with her. She's an author. She was a Catholic nun and did leave the Catholic Church, and then she was a scholar and has written several books. She's written 2 books on the Buddha and Buddhism and others about different great religions. And she goes back in the history, and her book on the Buddha is one of my very favorite books because she talks about the culture of that part of the world at the time and what was going on in other countries at that same time. And she has another book that you don't hear as much about, but it's called 12 Steps to a Compassionate Life. And that book is where she really compares different religions, and she comes out with, from her research, she finds the qualities that are important for all true religions to have very strong components of. And those are the same components that we call the Brahma Viharas, the sublime states. So those qualities are loving kindness and compassion and sympathetic joy or appreciative joy and equanimity. And so those are the practices that she found had to be a strong part of a religion that someone could see the truth in, and that made it a sound practice. So I'll read this, and excuse me, I'm having to drink a little bit of water. I have some sinus, so allergy problems. This is the leader's part, and then I'll read the different parts and I'll tell you who they're from. Living wisely according to our traditions. The test is simple. If people's beliefs, secular or religious, make them belligerent, intolerant, and unkind about other people's faith, they are not skillful. If, however, their convictions impel them to act compassionately and to honor the stranger, then they are good, helpful, and sound. This is the test of true religiosity in every single one of the major transitions. And that's from Karen Armstrong. Cover not truth with falsehood, nor conceal the truth when you know what it is. And that's from the Quran, 2:42. Do not obey evil laws. Do not live on in thoughtlessness. Do not follow false doctrines. And that's from the Buddhist Dhammapada, 168 and 169. To know the right thing to do and yet not to do it, this is sin. From the New Testament, James 4:17. Resist evil with that which is superior to evil, and your enemy will become a loyal and protecting friend. From the Quran, 73:10. Be vigorous in doing good. Take pains not to do evil. If you do what is good slothfully, your mind can easily and eagerly turn toward evil thoughts. Again, from the Dhammapada, 116. Do not befriend the hot-tempered, nor associate with the angry, for you mimic them and become entrapped. And that's from the Old Testament, Proverbs 22, 24, and 25. Abba Nesteros said, "Devote each day to living rightly. Pray each moment to be aware of God's presence, for God is ever present. Take no refuge in rules or judgments. Avoid harsh language, false testimony, and lies. Don't get angry at other people, nor mock or ridicule them. Do not imagine you are better than anyone, for this, above all, results in tragedy." That's from Nesteros 5, Sayings of the Desert Fathers. Abba Poeman said, "Imagine meeting 3 people, one of whom cultivates inner peace even in times of strife, one of whom cultivates inner gratitude even in times of suffering, and one of whom cultivates inner clarity even in times of distraction. Now know that you have met 3 people doing the same spiritual work: inner peace, inner gratitude, and inner clarity. To have a friend is better than to be alone. Together they enhance their labor, and if one falls, the other assists. How sad to fall alone, with none to raise you. Though one may be overpowered, 2 can withstand the attack. And a 3-fold friendship is stronger still. From the Old Testament, Ecclesiastes 4, 9 through 10 and 12. Never shall you attain righteousness unless you spend on others out of what you yourselves truly love. And whatever you spend, certainly God knows. From the Quran 3:92. You shouldn't you shouldn't owe anything to anyone except love. When you love someone, you have fulfilled the teaching. The commandments: not to commit adultery, not to murder, not to steal, not to covet, and any other commandment can all be summed up in one: to love your neighbor as yourself. Since love never wrongs the neighbor, love fulfills the teaching. The New Testament, Romans 13:8. Rabbi Hillel taught, "That which is hateful to you, do not do to another." This is the whole of the teaching. All the rest is commentary. Go and study it. From the Babylonian Talmud, Shabbat 31a. Truly righteous are those who believe in God and the last day, and the angels and the scriptures and the prophets, and who give material gifts out of love for God, even of what they care for, to relatives and orphans, and the poor and the traveler and the needy, and for the freeing of slaves, and who establish prayer and give alms. From the Quran 2:177. The stranger who resides with you shall be to you as one of your citizens. You shall love them as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. That's from the Old Testament, Leviticus 19:34. God will say, "O human, I fell ill and you visited me not." And you will say, "O God, how can I visit you when you are the God of the worlds?" God will say, "You knew one had fallen ill and yet you did not visit. Did you not know that had you visited, you would have found me there as well?" God will say, "O human, I asked for food and you refused." And you will say, "Oh God, how can I feed you when you are the God of the worlds?" God will say, "You knew one who asked you for food and yet you refused. Did you not know that had you offered food, you would surely have found me there. God will say, O human, I asked for water and you refused. And you will say, O God, how can I give you water when you are the God of the worlds? God will say, you knew one who asked you for water and you refused. Had you not refused, you would have surely found me there. And that's hadith of the Prophet Muhammad. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am only for myself, what am I? If not now, when? That's by Rabbi Hillel from Ethics of the Sages, Mishnah Evat 114. And then it all ends with the entire group reading, with generosity and kind words, always doing to others what is good. Treat all people as the same. And that's from the Buddhist book of suttas, the Anguttara Nikaya. So I wanted to read all of that because I think it speaks exactly to the point of what the world needs now. And that is to end all of the argumentative and provocative conversations and the polarization that begins sometimes splitting us into deep, deep differences. If we look for the similarities between our group and other groups, we're much more likely to find those similarities and be able to focus on those and find those as the starting ground for conversations. And I think as Buddhists, that's an assignment that we should be the most willing to take on. And I would say that because in one way, Buddhism is not really a religion. It's a way of life. It's a path that we're learning to walk and learning to experience based on the teachings of the Buddha. And in different religions, their arguments often begin over whose God is the right God, or who defines their God in the right way. And those arguments seem to not be, they may be fun for people who love to debate and just love that kind of discourse back and forth. But trying to argue with others or have conversations where we're trying to convince them that our point of view is right, typically, at least in America, those can end up being the conversations that become arguments and become linked back somehow to political beliefs, which is happening in our country now. So, because as Buddhists, the Buddha said, we don't know if there is a creator God or not. And so we don't take a stand. We don't have a position on that question. So it's not something that we need to argue about. It's not something we're trying to convince someone else of a certain position on. All we need to do is say, that's not something that we have a position on. We're not atheist, but we're also not deist. So that's how, when we can, if we want to say anything about it, we can talk about the Buddha's middle path. So if it's something that we haven't experienced for ourselves, we don't need to take a position on it. And we believe that the Buddha was a teacher, and he doesn't have to be made into a god or a deity. That his teaching had been perfected over many, probably millions of lifetimes. And he had rediscovered on his own the truths that had been lost since the time of a Buddha who would have come before him. So we honor him as a great teacher when we Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhase. We are praising the qualities of the Buddha. And his qualities were qualities of a kind of a superhuman, but I think a lot of that making it more like a superhuman came long after the Buddha lived. But he was a human being who was a perfect teacher. And he was a teacher, and he lived his life the way he taught us to practice. And what he was showing us was the way to find and enter the path that he had found. And then it was up to us to stay on the path and to find the truths and experience the truths that he had discovered. So it's a very experiential path. It's a way of living. And the Noble Eightfold Path is that path. And the Buddha is the pathfinder. But we can't just listen and read and believe in him to attain our spiritual end goal, which would for us might be nibbana or nirvana. So we can't do it by listening or having just a belief or faith in the Buddha. We have to experience and live the path and hopefully gain, even if it's just a little bit of the wisdom that he had attained. We know that we can be definitely on the path in this lifetime. So I think when we talk then about talking to other people, we don't ever need to proselytize because as Buddhists, the thing that we want to do is for our very own good, for our own progress, spiritual progress, we are always working with our minds, purifying our minds from defilements, from unskillful thinking, and really trying to understand the nature of reality and seeing it clearly, and to understand suffering, and to understand the impermanence of all conditioned things, and to understand the concept of not self. You know, we're not an unchanging identity. We don't have an unchanging part that is different from the rest of our body, which is impermanent and constantly changing. So what we're trying to do is learn to work with our minds to understand these characteristics of the world and understand how they affect us and how they affect everyone else. And when we purify our minds, we are on that path. And we use the Eightfold Path to help us know what to look at, what parts of our lives we need to focus on, what parts need to be purified and cleansed. So that's our work. Our work is not to proselytize. What people will see in us will be the fruit of our own practice. So if they see us as a good person, a kind person, a harmless person, a person that's not caught up and totally materialistic and caught up in the world, and a person who is harmless what we're showing them is how we are. And if anything is going to be a beacon to the teachings of the Buddha, it will just be what they see in us. If they see something that they think they would like, or that has, if we show a kind of calmness that they don't have in their lives, or they see us as being a safe person, someone they can talk to, someone they feel they can come to, and that we would be a good friend. Those are the qualities. If they see us respecting our friends and our parents and our own families, if they see us living lives that seem moral and ethical, that's really the fruit that we have for others in this world. We don't need to preach. We don't need to go after them. So that also makes us safe for those people. But they'll see what we do have, and they may want that. So usually people will ask, I'm a nun, so people will approach me even if they're not Buddhist. They recognize the robes. And they're often interested in where is there a place in this area where they can learn Buddhist meditation. And they may not have ever heard of the temple, even though Blue Lotus Temple has been around for about 15 years. But when they do find out, then schools come and like to have tours for their students, and they get to practice. Maybe younger students we let them sit for 5 minutes and understand a little bit more about meditation and about Buddhism. And groups of adults come and just come for the experience of seeing what it's like. And many of those people are the ones who come back. They come out of curiosity, but many times they'll come back because they like the feeling of the building, or they like the people they met, or they felt a calm sense of peacefulness in the service. So when people become interested in Buddhism, that's what they're seeing. They're seeing some of the fruits from our practices. So I was talking to a group of friends who are also in some of the classes I teach. And I told them about my interest in this topic. And we were talking about how can we find common ground with people who are very different from us. Their religions may be, they may be much more of a fundamental nature, where they might find fault with other religions, or they might be in a much more conservative politically. Although it isn't necessarily true that conservatives are in America are Republican and liberals are Democrats, but that's a kind of stereotype that seems to create a lot of the tension between the two groups these days. But to find common ground for a conversation, to work with someone, to be a partner with someone. So many couples they haven't been able to maintain their relationships because of political differences. We see that more and more. So how do we find common ground? And how do we even begin to approach people who are so different from us, or we feel like they've grown to be so different from us, and they feel the same about us over the political upheaval and other issues in this country. So some of the people I was talking to right away said, I used to be that person. I used to be the person who, had to tell people who I was and what I stood for, and I wanted to argue about religion, and one person said, she finally realized, I don't need to be important. And that allowed her to back away. I don't need to be important. It allowed her to back away from wanting to dominate a conversation to convince the other person that her beliefs were right and the other person's beliefs not so right. And I know a lot of people have will say, which is better, to be happy or to be right? Which is very similar to her little sentence she says. Her mantra is, I don't need to be important. And I think thinking I don't need to be right is very good to remember, to keep that close to us. And another person in the group said they always try to remember that you don't negotiate your truths. They had read that from a teacher. Someone saying, you don't negotiate your truths. So arguing with other people over our spiritual truths can end up being like a negotiation. So rather than try to battle it out in a conversation with someone with different views, and a lot of times in those conversations, we might tend to back off of one of our beliefs and let the more dominant person feel like they've won that argument. And that shouldn't be how we do it either. So, how do we feel safe then when we're talking to people where we know it could become very volatile if we start speaking about different beliefs? And in America, the two major political parties are so polarized because there have become the political leaders of the parties at the top have tried to create that polarization and used very hot button issues that are tied into people's religious beliefs. And it's really gotten to be a terrible problem in this country. So pulling us away from any kind of conversation with each other. So how do we feel safe? And so I think what we can see from the Buddhist teachings, but what's wonderful is what we see from all of the major teachings in the world is that seeing God or seeing spirit, seeing truth in every other living being, being a friend to strangers, taking care of others, seeing where their needs are and being there to help them, giving, that quality of generosity that's giving from the things that we love, not just the scraps that are left over, not just the things that we're ready to throw away, but that quality of giving from ourselves, giving from something we love. And often in our culture, Giving of time is that thing that's that quality that people never have enough of. And so when people give of their time, that's an incredible gift. And we need that more and more with our organizations and trying to be there just to take care of the communities that we have. So at our Buddhist temple, and we're young, we're so young in this country, even having a Buddhist temple with, we have Sri Lankan teachers, but the majority, 99% of the people who come to the temple are not from Sri Lanka. We're all Westerners, and there are people we have a lot of diversity, but it's not a traditional Sri Lankan temple. But we have a growing group of Buddha kids, and all of that is done with volunteers. And we like to have different classes and things going on. Now we're having it all on Zoom. So we have a volunteer who is willing to do Buddha kids on Zoom. And that was creating an entirely different program from the one we had at the temple. And I do a book group, and we have other volunteers who are helping with some of the projects that are ongoing, some of the ways we're trying to raise money to pay bills and things like that at the temple. And there are volunteers who help out with those efforts. So even with the temple not really open because of the pandemic, there are always things volunteers can do. And being a volunteer is what helps turn it into a community. Otherwise, it would be a more sterile environment. So when we talk about the things that we can do that help us connect with other people, regardless of the path we're on, it's those, we want to see that generosity in ourselves. And so we like seeing it in others. And if we look at all of the great spiritual paths in the world, generosity is always one of the top qualities. That giving of ourselves is a way of even surrendering, because we're able to let go of some of that, some of what's precious to us, and realize that letting go of it is so much better than hanging on to it. So we also see loving kindness is definitely, loving kindness and goodwill is in all spiritual traditions. Taking care of the stranger, because at some point, we've been strangers as well. And being able to find a balance in life so we can be not caught up in the drama and not caught up in just the very moment that we're in emotionally. And I think all spiritual wisdoms have the same goals. And the wording may be a little different, but we can see just from reading all of these selections from different teachings, they're more similar than the characteristics that one needs or one develops by being on the spiritual path. In all of them, those characteristics are much more the same than they are different. And it's the dogma and perhaps some of the rituals in the practices that are more different. They're different from each other. But the fruit of the person, they're very similar. And if we can begin to let go of ego, like my friend who said, I didn't need to be important. Or if we prefer to be happy instead of right all the time, that's how we begin to have conversations with people who are different from us. And even the people we know who we know in the past, we've had difficulty not getting angry, not getting angry and simply walking away. And then we've undone any good that we may have wanted to do. But we need to start really focusing on what are those things we can bring out that we can share. And I think if we start looking at the skillful qualities that we're trying to develop, and for our own personal work in purifying our mind, we're always trying to encourage those skillful, wholesome qualities. And we're keeping a guard against the unwholesome, unskillful qualities. And we're encouraging the good, the skillful, and we're letting go of what is not skillful and wholesome. And then we're guarding the doors. And so I think when we find other people who in their own practice are doing the same thing, that's the easiest bridge to build between us. And if we're with people who are not trying to do the same thing, we'll find that out, and we may need to be careful. They may not be the people that we would consider noble friends. And friendship is often mentioned in all of these different paths. And remember, the Buddha asked Ananda, how much do you think friendship is in my teachings? And Ananda said, I know it's at least 50%. That's the level of importance to the path, is to have friendships, noble friends. And the Buddha said, no, Ananda, that's not right. It's not 50%. It's all of the path is having noble friends. And noble friends are the ones who we feel safe with, the friends we can feel they'll take care of us and we'll take care of them, and they'll be honest with us. And if they think we've done something that was not true, not right, they will talk to us about it. They'll keep us out of trouble, because if we're with them, they're not going to be wanting to do something they would get in trouble if they did. And they're going to help guide us to be the same way, and we do the same for them. And so that friendship is very important. And we will have noble friends who are not the same religion. We can have noble friends who have a different path entirely. They could even be secular with no religion at all, or no spiritual path, because the qualities we would look for is the same: kindness, generosity, honesty, compassion, and that quality of balance. We're less affected by the storms and the droughts and the emotional upheaval in life. So I hope that gives you just a taste of some of the things that we need to look at when we are talking to others. Right speech is so important in the Buddhist path, and it is in others too. And so when we find people that we can be with and have conversations with, and we feel good afterwards, and feel like if we had a conversation, we talked about things that mattered. We weren't using aggressive speech or unkind speech. We weren't gossiping or talking about trivial things, but those wonderful conversations we can have with our noble friends. And more we need to think about that in all conversations we have, to remember that what we want to do is be someone who can find a way to connect with other people without anger, without trying to win, but because we want to be someone that they would not think of as aggressive. We want to be harmless. We want to be kind. We want to be that compassionate person that they could trust talking to. So I've enjoyed talking to you, and I'd love to know what situations are like in your communities and how you feel about the same, the provocative relationships that you may have with other religious groups and how you handle those, because I know it's a big concern with most all of us here in America. So thank you so much. I do want to end just with this beautiful ending. May the actions that we take towards the good, towards understanding ourselves, toward being more peaceful, be of benefit to all beings everywhere.